It's official. America has a new Attorney General, Jeff Sessions, sworn in just a few minutes ago. Despite the efforts of Elizabeth Warren, Pocahontas, to prevent that from happening. 9:34, Bill Colley with you on Top Story on News Radio 1310 KLIX, newsradio1310.com. Sean Hannity really delved into that story about her claims of being from an indigenous tribe, at least somewhere in her family. Delved into it yesterday, and, Alfred, there's simply no evidence. But she certainly used that to get preference for various jobs she applied for over the years. That's what Democrats consider to be honesty. 9:34, Bill Colley with you on Top Story on News Radio 1310, KLIX and newsradio1310.com. My former representative from when I lived in southern Delaware sent me a note and said that, judging by the reactions on her Facebook page, media has been telling us that the Republicans were heavy-handed with her the other day, but he said, judging by reactions on her Facebook page, she's going to be very, very vulnerable next year. Bill Colley wanted to mention as well this morning that you could reach his show called Top Story by calling 736-0300. That's 736-0300. And you're on the air. Go ahead.
Oh, well, Bill, glad you brought out about Bill and Crystal, because he was the father of the modern neocon movement, as you well know. And the one thing about
they were all right. His dad and all those guys were all old-line liberals who just created the neoconservative movement.
Yeah, they've right, and infested the conservative movement. They're phony conservatives. They don't believe in the Constitution as the founding fathers, the original intent. They're pushing for the Article 5 Constitutional Convention. They're just phony conservative. They've hacked into the conservative movement, and like I say, had a silver spoon in his mouth. But they're really dangerous because they claim they're conservative, and yet they really aren't. They're just rhinos, basically. So I just wanted to make that comment. Thank you very much.
Thank you. Thank you for the call. We have another caller joining us. Caller, you're up next. You're on KLIX. Go ahead.
Yeah, good morning, Bill. You were talking about the conservatives having to hide themselves in Hollywood. It's worse for Christians. The guy that played on Every Which Way You Can, the leader of the motorcycle gang, the Black Widows, his name is John Quaid. Once he professed his Christianity, he was out. No more work for him.
Yeah,
it's just that way across the board down there.
He was a regular in a lot of those movies of the late 70s and early 80s. Thank you much for the call. And, he was part of that, what do you call it, that stock troupe that worked with, one of the, I think, great actors of our day, Clint Eastwood, and currently one of the great directors of our day. You're up next. You're on the air on KLIX.
Good morning, Bill. Reference Pocahontas. Is the federal government have to put up with her statements all the time, or can they request a DNA statement to show whether she truly is of Indian heritage or not?
Wouldn't that be fun? See if she's willing to submit to that. That's a great idea. Her opponent, if she does decide she's running for president, because after all, Democrats already had one liberal old bag run, and it didn't work. Why not have it all over again come 2020? Maybe her opponent could say, I'll take a DNA test if you take one as well. You're up next, and you're on News Radio 1310 KLIX and newsradio1310.com. Hello.
Hey, Bill. Great show as always.
Well, thank you.
I've worked for many, many years in landscaping, and the company I worked for a while there, they fired all the native-born Americans for some reason before I got there. And then he told me that he went ahead and hired all of these illegal workers because the white boys wouldn't show up to work. And the funny thing happened is, after they'd been here about a year, 2 years, they started falling into the same nonsense that and you had them not coming into work, sleeping on the job. So, illegal workers, yes, some might come with a desire to work hard and to prosper. Be it they came illegally, which they shouldn't have. But to say they're all, the saviors of industries, is just ridiculous. One other thing, I think this Trump should really look, and the Republicans, at entitlement reform. And all of these Americans who are on welfare, if they should do something about it, because there's plenty of jobs at a dairy that they need workers. Why can't Americans do those jobs?
I think,
So
yeah, that's a great question. Trump with entitlement reform. I just read this morning that in the next 2 weeks, thank you for the call, there's going to be a major announcement on that. Uh, Caller referenced the Constitutional Convention, or CONCON as it's called. And there is a piece today, guest editorial in the Press Tribune out of Nampa. And I'm impressed that a couple of our state legislators have gotten behind the notion that this is a bad idea. One is Representative Judy Boyle. She's a Republican, but she's not alone. She has support across the aisle as well from a Democrat, Elena Rubel. I believe it's Rubel or Rubel. The two of them say this is a bad idea because it could become, no matter what they're claiming, it's only about one issue. It could be a runaway convention. There's no way legally these two write that could be prevented from happening. In other words, it's a big promise, but it's a pipe dream. Better to let the old style system where Congress proposes it and says to the states, all right, this one issue, up or down. We've got a short break coming. Bill Colley with you on Top Story on News Radio 1310. KLIX at newsradio1310.com. A couple of thoughts coming up on weather. Also, another state issue. We could see a change in the speed limit if you're trying to pass somebody. I had lunch one day about a year ago with State Representative Lance Clow, and he wouldn't have any problem admitting this. He's a quieter sort of Republican than I am. I think that he would agree with that statement. But he has a proposed bill that, from a common sense standpoint, I agree with, and I want to mention that in just a moment. And then I want to talk a little bit about some weather stories. We're at 48. It's 9:43. Bill Colley with you on Top Story on News Radio 1310, KLIX and newsradio1310.com. And I was going to mention them earlier, but I heard the taped commercial, and I thought, well, I'll wait a few more minutes. But I do want to remind you that my good friends at Waddell & Reed have been in business in the investment game now for, well, I shouldn't call it a game. I mean, a game sounds like it's fun. And I'm an investor, and I'll tell you, it's not always, it sometimes could be nail biting. But if you have somebody there to work with you, it can keep you relatively calmer. I don't say calm, but calmer in most situations. Waddell & Reed has been in business since 1937, 80 years now. One of the oldest firms to offer mutual funds, and in fact, Waddell & Reed owns and manages two mutual fund families. And this is why I say it's not a game, because they invest with a conservative nature. So it's serious, serious business. Waddell & Reed knows what it's doing, as evidenced by being in business now 8 decades. And they'll take a more planning approach with you and take a look at each piece of your own individual puzzle to help you build proper expectations. Waddell & Reed builds plans around clients' needs and goals and helps you manage money. And at Waddell & Reed, they take planning seriously. Story from the Boise Weekly today, which, as I mentioned, is a good alternative newspaper, even if I don't always agree with sometimes the editorial slant. But I like to read this, and I get daily update, or rather weekly updates, or is it daily updates? Now that they're online, I guess Boise Weekly is a daily. But I get regular updates. I've signed up for those, and I get those in my email. And it mentions that Representative Lance Clow, who's my representative in my home district right here in Twin Falls, is proposing an idea that would give, and there's this in quotes, leeway, the word leeway is in quotes, to passing motorists on Idaho highways. Now, we're not talking interstates. We're just talking about regular two-lane roads. But, you get those moments where you have a wide open view ahead of you on a two-lane road, and you can see what's coming up for, a couple of miles sometimes. And then he points this out, you end up pulling up behind somebody who's driving. Well, I'm a sightseer. I get out there. He's not referring to me specifically, but he may be referring to somebody like me. I get out there and I like to look at all of the beautiful scenery we have in this state. And I admit that I'm not much of a leadfoot. In fact, if you remember the old commercials, the Wendy's commercials, when Dave Thomas, the founder, was still alive, and he would be driving his old classic cars down the road, but he's just barely tooling along, and traffic's backed up, people honking their horns. Well, according to Representative Clow, he points out that current Idaho law makes no accommodations if you speed up beyond the speed limit to pass somebody. So if somebody is driving 43 and a 55 and you've you get by them by going 58, you could be ticketed. So what he'd like to do is give a little bit of a cushion in there, up to 15 miles per hour, and he says it would give you some leeway to get around. Not a bad idea. And can I point out, too, as well, like in those times I've been out sightseeing, as I've been driving around various places in the state, people are already doing it. It's not like it doesn't happen because we have a law. Speed limit laws, well, and I had a state trooper in another state tell me one time that the hands-free cell phone laws that a lot of places have are probably the most disobeyed laws that he's ever seen. I actually think it's speed limits, just judging by what I see when I'm out there. But this would allow people to actually, at least for a few seconds, to speed up to get around somebody who was driving 10, 12 miles below the speed limit. 946, Bill Colley with you on Top Story on News Radio 1310, KLIX and newsradio1310.com. We're at 48. There are some highways and roads right now in Idaho, though, where you can't get around them because they're closed. And I was looking at one of the updates from KMVT this morning. And, we have a stretch of Interstate 86 closed. Last look, anyway, at least I was my last check. And we have some streets here in town that are closed because of high water in various places. And it's all due to the runoff we've had because of the quick warm-up over the last week. And it's not going to go away anytime soon. There's a lot of snow still up in the mountains, snow and ice. Yet people here are just so nonchalant about it. All right, I'll go find another road and I'll take the detour. Nobody here sweats this sort of thing. And then this morning I got out of bed and I turned on Fox and Friends, and there's Janice Dean standing outside in a snowbank wearing a knit cap and her gloves on, and we're going to have snowfall rates for a couple of hours this morning of maybe 2 to 3 inches, and the end of the world is coming, and the groundhog should have been better behaved. And then she tossed it to another guy who's standing in another part of New York City near a river saying, death from the sky. If you don't get out of the way, snowflakes are going to fall on your head and crush you. And this is going on all over the Northeast today. Now, I grew up in the Northeast. I grew up actually more at the Great Lakes part of the region, which, somewhat of a more Midwestern culture. But it's February. It snows there in February. The worst winter storm I ever experienced as far as the actual volume of snow that fell was in March. And then when the snow finally melted a week later, we had some flooding that lasted for 2 months. And then we went on a picnic in the middle of April because we had this beautiful day when it was 80 degrees. And then the third weekend in April, it snowed again. In fact, I remember one Mother's Day in May 10th it was, of 1996, I had to go out and do a story about the 8 inches of snow that fell. 2 days earlier, we went to the same place I'd been 2 days earlier because it had been in the 80s. We went to an ice cream stand on a Friday, and we did a story about the warm weather and people eating ice cream. And we went back there 2 days later with 8 inches of snow on the ground. So it snows there. It snows here. And in fact, it has snowed in all 50 states of the Union. It snows in the mountains in Hawaii. It has snowed in Florida. And in Alabama, Mississippi, Louisiana, Texas, New Mexico, Arizona, Southern California gets snow at times. It happens. It's called part of the weather, and it's been going on since long before any of us were here. And yet you wouldn't know it by all of the hysteria that takes place now in modern media when we get a little bit of weather. And now the politicians try and respond to placate the media. This is the liberal governor of Connecticut, Dan Malloy. And he's talking about the end of the earth.
We have 634 state trucks ready, 250 contractor trucks ready to respond to snowfall.
Which will all be over within a few hours, we should point out. And then it'll melt, and people will shovel it out of the way as they've been doing for millennia. Neighboring Massachusetts is run by a governor, a Republican by the name of Charlie Baker. He's no better.
It's a pretty big slog of the Commonwealth that's probably going to take.
Introducing the all-new Honda Clarity Fuel Cell. It runs on.
All right, well, he's not talking about Honda Fuel Cell. I don't know where that came from. That just popped up out of nowhere. Charlie Baker, though, giving pretty much the same warning that his liberal counterpart in Connecticut is giving, and that is, stay off the roads, shelter in place, hide in your safe room. Don't go outdoors, because if you go outdoors, it's going to be snowy and cold, and you could die. Well, yeah, that's possible. Also, I could die on a sunny day in the middle of summer. That's possible too. We're at 48, 10 minutes away from 10 o'clock. Bill Colley with you on Top Story on News Radio 1310, KLIX, and newsradio1310.com. How did we get here that in this day and age, a little bit of snow causes such sheer panic and people go and empty shelves and stores? As a friend of mine once said, we were at work and we were doing a story about people, practically looting the grocery stores. And he said to me, why don't they just wait until the snow ends and then go tomorrow and get bread? It's a good point. But we were responsible in media for doing this. And I'll tell you why in just a moment. I'll squeeze a telephone call in, though, first. You're on the air and you're on KLIX.
Bill, earlier you had a police officer guest on. I'd like to contribute a safety thought. If you have a cute daughter, plant rose bushes under and next to her bedroom window. Also plant rose bushes near any blind spots you have near your home and your business.
Right on topic. Now, 3 weeks ago, I had a guest on. If you'd like to comment about guests from 3 weeks ago or 3 months ago, I guess we can interrupt my thought train and do that too. Oh, we're 8 minutes now away from 10 o'clock. It is 48. Bill Colley with you on Top Story on News Radio 1310, KLIX, and newsradio1310.com. Community Bulletin Board. That's what it should be. Just, what's on your mind? What's your beef? Well, Bill, I got an itch at a place I wouldn't rather describe, and it really bothers me today. All right, and what's your complaint? Oh, Bill, there's a big snake, and he just crawled across my backyard. I'm surprised because it's kind of muddy out there. All right, let's go to the next. I'm sorry, but some days I just feel that I'm living in the middle of the loony bin, and I'm the only sane person there. I've been locked away like Jack Nicholson's character in One Flew Over the Cuckoo's Nest. Getting back to the weather. This all got started back in the 1990s. I had, it was actually quite fun. I worked for a time with a consultancy called the Broadcast Image Group, which consulted TV stations on how to change their news products. So instead of actually doing real news any longer, we were told people don't care about real news. They've got 500 channels, or we'll soon have 500 channels to choose from as the cable universe explodes, and you will no longer have a monopoly on their eyeballs. And if people are watching instead reruns of The Simpsons or Judge Judy, they will not be able to see you doing the news, so therefore you won't be able to sell them soap. And your company, your ownership group, will be very unhappy that we can't sell them soap, and you'll all lose your jobs. So we're going to do faux news instead. And what that means is whenever the weather gets really bad, we're going to frighten people. It reminds me of Daffy Duck in that one cartoon where he jumps out of the icebox and he says to Porky Pig, mush, mush, mush all the way. Ah! He's talking about the terrible snowstorm he's just been through. So we were told, instead of putting the weather near the end of the newscast, move it up to the front. Oh, yes, Ron and Maureen, it is going to be warm for the next 3 days. Remember, though, when it's warm outside, you may decide to go outside beyond the normal period of time you would do the rest of the year, and you might get a sunburn. And remember, sunburns are bad for you. So in the next segment of the news, after I finish the weather, we're going to have a reporter come by and tell you what's the best sunblock to buy, just in case. Meanwhile, the city just raised your taxes by 400%, but forget about that. We're going to talk to you about sunblock instead. So I would go to these meetings of the Broadcast Image Group, and we'd go, oh, it's beautiful. I'd get to go to San Antonio. We'd get to spend some of our nights out at the Riverwalk. Oh, beautiful. And then if we weren't at the Riverwalk, we would go out to the Guadalupe River Ranch, which is the old Olivia de Havilland Ranch in the middle of Texas in the hill country. And we'd go out there and we'd eat lots of food, ride horses in the desert, and then have an occasional meeting. It was great fun, and my company covered it. At this day and age, they wouldn't do that. But we would go out there, we'd sit around, and we would have these discussions on how we could get more people watching news. Not be more newsy, but get more people watching news. So we had to frighten them about the weather. We had to punch up weather stories because, well, we put a bunch of people in a focus group and asked them, what's important to you? Do you want to know if somebody's going to be raising your taxes because you never bother to go to any city council meetings? Or would you like to know if a snowstorm's coming? Oh, snowstorms are bad. Yes. So we do those stories. One of our counterparts, also working in my company at the time, one of our other TV stations out of Rochester, New York, they had an ice storm come in, and they did team coverage of the ice storm. 4 consecutive stories that ate up nearly 10 minutes of the opening of the newscast First, the weather guy. The ice is out there and it's deadly. Followed by a woman doing a story about ice being slippery. Because, you wouldn't know that. I'm 55 years old. I just walked outside. And what is this? I've never seen this before. I've only grown up in the Northeast and lived most of my life in a winter climate. What is this? And it seems the ground is moving beneath my feet. So ice is slippery was the second story in the team coverage, followed by what you should wear if you're going outside in the cold, because let's be frank about this. If we didn't come on the news and tell you that you have to wear clothes in the winter, you would walk out your front door on your way to work in the morning naked. And clearly, if it's 10 below zero and the wind is blowing, you're going to have your skin freeze and die very, very quickly. Or get a very severe case of frostbite. You might also get arrested for exposure, but it's a different type of exposure when it comes to that definition. So remember, if you're going outside, this is third story in team coverage, if you're going outside, wear clothes. It's cold out. And then the fourth story, if you're indoors or outdoors, even on a snowy day, here's our advice for keeping you alive. Remember, breathe in, breathe out. Followed by, breathe in again, breathe out again. Because we here at the very big television station of your city, if we didn't tell you this, you'd forget to breathe. And if you're going to survive in winter, spring, summer, or fall, you're going to be breathing. That's clear. So therefore, this is what you need to do. So we've got all of these stories. So they're going to be shoveling some snow in the Northeast in February, which has been going on ever since people actually settled in the Northeast, what we call the Northeast of the United States today. It's been going on there for centuries, millennia, who knows for how long, maybe before people were here on this planet. Don't you know? And yet, if you were to turn on your network television's newscast this morning, that's all you would see. And yet, here in the Northwest or the Intermountain West, you got a little bit of water on the ground now, and it's a little high, and everybody just goes about their business. And you ask yourself, those are the people on that part of the country who think they're smarter and better than the rest of us and need to tell us how we should live and who we should vote for. Are they really any smarter than we are? God willing, and the creek don't rise. Well, it's going to rise the next few days. That is true because of the meltdown. But they'll let me come back and do this all over again tomorrow morning between 8 and 10 o'clock. We're going to be talking about firearms tomorrow morning right here on News Radio 1310, KLIX, and newsradio1310.com. In the meantime, Rush Limbaugh following the news at 10 o'clock from Fox. After news at 1 o'clock today from Fox, Sean Hannity, Glenn Beck at 4, and Dave Ramsey from 7 until 10 o'clock tonight.